A racist officer laughs in the face of a black woman, mocking her authority and belittling her presence in a room full of officers. To him, she's a joke, someone not worth respecting, not worth acknowledging. But what he doesn't know, she has the power to end his career in seconds, and by the time he realizes who she really is, it's already too late. What happens when those who enforce the law refuse to respect it? What happens when arrogance collides with accountability? Stay with me, because this story is about to take an unforgettable turn. Have you ever witnessed someone underestimate the wrong person? Tell us in the comments, because by the end of this story, one man's unchecked arrogance will lead to his downfall, and justice will be served where it's least expected. The police station was busy with ringing phones, officers talking, and the sound of footsteps moving across the tiled floor. It was a place where law and order were supposed to be upheld, but respect was not always given equally. A black woman in her late 30s walked in with confidence. She was dressed in a neat navy blue blazer and white shirt, looking both professional and calm. She carried herself with authority. Yet she did not seek attention. She had been in many police stations before. She knew how things worked. As she moved through the room, she could feel people looking at her. Some officers glanced at her and then looked away, while others stared openly. She was used to this. Then, a voice filled with arrogance called out, "Lost, sweetheart." A white officer in his early 40s stood with his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. He had an air of superiority, the kind that came from years of believing he was more important than others. She turned to face him, her expression calm. "Excuse me," she asked. The officer walked closer, still smirking. "You must be new here," he said. "Maybe a clerk? You don't look like you belong on this side of the station." The room went quiet for a moment. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, while others pretended not to hear. It was clear that this was normal behavior for him. But she did not react. She simply watched him, waiting, because very soon he was going to wish he had kept his mouth shut. The room was silent now, except for the officer's laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was loud, mocking, and filled with disbelief. He tossed his head back, his whole body shaking as he laughed openly, as if she had just told the funniest joke of his life. Several officers turned their heads, some grinning, some staying neutral, and others looking away. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. She simply stood there, holding up her badge, waiting for him to finish. But he didn't stop. Instead, he wiped the corner of his eye, shaking his head. "Oh, man, that's a good one," he said, still chuckling. "You almost had me for a second. You know, you should try stand-up comedy. Seriously." The woman remained composed. She had seen this kind of reaction before, many times. She lowered her badge slightly, but kept it visible. "It's real," she said calmly. The officer let out another sharp laugh and turned toward the other officers. "Hey, guys," he said loudly, "check this out. Apparently, they're just handing out badges now. What's next? Letting criminals run the station?" A few of them laughed nervously. Others glanced at each other, hesitant. No one intervened. She could feel it. The quiet approval. The ones who found his mockery amusing. And the ones who just didn't want to get involved. She had been in this position before. She knew how these moments played out. The power dynamics. The silent agreement of the room. The way people let things slide until it was too late. She studied the officer carefully, watching him as he smirked at her like she was some kind of fraud. Then, with exaggerated curiosity, he tilted his head. "Tell me, where'd you get that badge? You find it lying around? Or did you print it off the internet?" Some officers snickered. Others just stayed silent. She didn't react. Her face remained neutral, but inside, She had already made a decision. She met his gaze. "My badge is as real as my authority," she said. "And if I were you, I'd start thinking carefully about what you say next." He grinned wider, shaking his head. "Or what?" he taunted, crossing his arms. "You gonna write me up? Report me? Oh, no, I'm so scared." Mocking, sarcastic. He still thought this was a joke. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to something lower but no less arrogant. "Listen, sweetheart, I've been in this department for over 15 years, seen all kinds of people come and go. But you," he scoffed, looking her up and down, "you won't last a month." The words hung in the air. No one stepped in. No one corrected him. It was his playground, and everyone knew it. Or at least, that's what he thought. She nodded slightly, as if making a mental note. "Well, Sergeant Mitchell," she said, her tone cool and even, "I'd advise you to think carefully about your words." His smirk returned instantly. "Yeah? And why's that?" Her expression didn't change. "Because in a few minutes," she said, "you're going to regret every single one of them." The confidence in her voice made something shift in the air. Some of the other officers exchanged glances. Mitchell still didn't get it. He scoffed. "Oh, I doubt that." He laughed again, loud, careless, reckless, and in that moment he didn't realize he had already sealed his fate. The laughter had completely died. Not a single sound filled the room. The air hung heavy, thick with something unspoken, something that had shifted in a way no one had expected. Sergeant Mitchell, who had just been laughing loudly, his voice echoing through the precinct, now stood frozen, his smirk slowly fading. The badge ID in the woman's hand shimmered under the bright overhead lights, black and gold, crisp and official. At first, he barely registered it. His mind was still catching up, still trying to process why the room had gone silent, and why no one else was laughing anymore. And then, his eyes locked onto the words printed in bold capital letters. His breath caught in his throat. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His heart, which had been beating steadily just moments ago, now pounded so hard in his chest that it made his ears ring. There had to be a mistake. His eyes darted back to her face, looking for any sign that this was a joke, that this was some elaborate prank. But she wasn't joking. Her face was calm, controlled, deadly serious. And in that moment, he knew this was real. He had just mocked the chief of police in front of the entire department. A slow wave of realization spread through the precinct. A few officers stiffened. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some looked away completely, as if pretending they hadn't just witnessed Mitchell destroy his own career. For a moment, it was deathly quiet. No ringing phones, no shuffling paperwork, just silence. Then, Mitchell opened his mouth. This has to be some kind of mistake." His voice wasn't as steady anymore. The arrogance that had fueled his every word just moments ago was gone, replaced with something that hadn't been there before. The woman didn't say anything. She just watched him. Watched as he fumbled for an explanation. Watched as his confidence crumbled to dust. His gaze darted to the other officers, looking for support, for someone to step in, to back him up. But no one did. He was alone, and for the first time he felt it. Something inside him twisted, an ugly feeling that clawed at his chest. It was the feeling of power slipping away, something he had never thought would happen to him. "Listen, Chief," he tried again, forcing a strained chuckle. "I didn't mean anything by it. You know how it is. Just a little station humor." His voice was too high, too fast. The words didn't land the way they used to. Before, when he joked like this, the room would laugh. Before, when he said whatever he wanted, no one would question him. But now, his words hit nothing but cold, empty silence. She raised an eyebrow, finally speaking. A little station humor. Her tone was even, controlled, devoid of amusement. "Is that what you're calling it?" Mitchell let out another dry chuckle, his skin burning hot, his palms suddenly damp. "Look, Chief, She held up her hand. "Enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. Mitchell snapped his mouth shut so fast his teeth clicked. She took a step forward. Just one step. But he immediately took a step back. For years, he had been the one people backed away from. For years, he had been the one with the presence that filled the room. For years, he had spoken without fear, walked without hesitation. But now he was the one backing away. Now, he was the one shrinking. Now, he was the one afraid. The chief of police exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "Sergeant Mitchell, you have made it very clear what kind of officer you are today." Mitchell felt something cold settle in his stomach. He tried again. "Chief, She didn't let him finish. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crisp white document. She unfolded it slowly, then held it up. Mitchell stared. His entire world blurred. He didn't have to read it. He already knew. It was his suspension notice, the final nail in the coffin. The words came down like a hammer. "Effective immediately. You are suspended, pending an internal investigation." Mitchell felt his knees weaken. A sharp breath rushed out of his lungs. His hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. This wasn't happening. His chest rose and fell quickly. His body felt like it was burning from the inside. His gaze jumped from the suspension notice to the woman holding it. The same woman he had just mocked, belittled, disrespected. The same woman who, just minutes ago, he thought he was better than. And now, she had stripped him of everything, his badge, his authority, his power. He wanted to argue. He wanted to fight. He wanted to undo this. But it was too late. His own arrogance had led him here. His own words had done this. His own actions had destroyed him. And now he was the one left, standing powerless. The chief of police gave him one last look. It wasn't angry. It wasn't satisfied. It was just disappointed. "I hope you've learned something today," she said simply. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Mitchell behind, leaving him to drown in his own failure, leaving him with the truth he could no longer ignore. It was over, and there was no one to blame but himself. Sergeant Mitchell stood frozen, his eyes still locked on the suspension notice in the chief's hand. The room was silent. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, suffocating, crushing. Moments ago he had been laughing, mocking, belittling. Now he couldn't even breathe. His entire world was crumbling right in front of him. And the worst part? There was nothing he could do to stop it. He felt his throat tighten, his skin burning hot with panic. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. His mind raced, scrambling for a way out, some kind of excuse, something, anything to undo this. Finally, his mouth opened. Chief, come on. This is a misunderstanding." His voice wavered. The confidence, the arrogance, it was gone. The chief didn't respond. She just watched him. Her silence made it worse. He forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "This is crazy," he said, his voice too high, too fast. "You can't be serious. I was just joking. I mean, it was all in good fun, right?" He looked around, searching for agreement, looking for someone, anyone, to back him up. But the other officers wouldn't meet his eyes. Some looked down at their desks. Some shifted awkwardly. Others just stood still, watching. And then it hit him. No one was going to help him. For years, he had been the loudest voice in the room. For years, he had been the one who laughed at others, the one who made people feel small. But now, he was the one shrinking. Now, he was the one begging. His chest rose and fell too quickly. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He took a shaky step forward, his voice desperate now. "Chief, please. You know I've been here for years. I'm a good officer." Silence. I was just messing around. You can't suspend me over that." Silence. The chief's expression didn't change. She simply extended the suspension notice toward him. "Sign it," she said. 2 simple words, but they hit like a hammer. Mitchell's legs wobbled slightly. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was it. This was really happening. His voice broke. "Please." It was almost a whisper, but she didn't waver. "Sign it," she repeated. His breathing grew ragged. His hands shook as he reached for the paper. His name looked blurry through his panic. For years, he had signed paperwork without a second thought. Promotions, reports, evaluations. But this was a signature that would end everything. The weight of it pressed down on him. He had spent his entire career believing he was untouchable. Now, he was watching it all fall apart. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen. He hovered over the line. For a split second he hesitated, as if by waiting just one more second, he could stop this from being real. But it was already too late. His name scratched against the paper, and with that single stroke of ink, it was over. As soon as he set the pen down, his legs nearly gave out. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, one officer turned away, then another. One by one, people started moving again. The spell had broken. Mitchell realized with a sickening feeling that no one was shocked anymore. This wasn't a tragedy. This was expected. And that was the worst part. They had all seen this coming. They had all known he was going to fall eventually. It was just a matter of when. A heavy breath rushed out of his chest. His vision blurred at the edges. He felt like he was drowning. The chief turned slightly, glancing toward the doorway. "You have 15 minutes to clear out your locker," she said. Mitchell snapped his head up. His heart skipped. "Wait, what?" She was already dismissing him. Like he was nothing. Like he hadn't been standing here for the last 15 years. A wave of humiliation burned through him. He looked around again, his hands shaking. No one met his gaze. No one defended him. No one cared. His stomach turned. For the first time he truly understood. He had spent years believing that power made him untouchable. But it wasn't power that made a person respected. It wasn't a badge. It wasn't years of service. It was character. And he had never had that. The truth crashed over him all at once. And for the first time, he felt powerless. The chief turned back to him one last time. Her face wasn't angry. She wasn't smiling. She just looked disappointed. And that was worse than anything else. "I hope you've learned something today," she said. Then she turned, and she walked away. No yelling, no anger, no celebration. She didn't need to say anything else, because the lesson had already been taught. Mitchell watched as she disappeared through the door. His body felt too heavy. The world seemed too quiet. He had mocked her. He had laughed at her. He had treated her as nothing. And in the end, she was the one who had the last word. The finality of it hit him like a brick wall. He was done. There was no coming back from this. The realization was crushing, and all he could do now was live with it. The fallout was immediate. The moment Sergeant Mitchell walked out of the precinct, his head low, his body tense, the news had already started spreading. Within hours, a video surfaced. Someone had been recording. A short 1-minute clip captured everything: the mocking, the arrogance, the humiliation, the moment the chief revealed her badge, and his complete downfall. It spread like wildfire. By the next morning, it had millions of views. Social media erupted. People shared, commented, debated. Some called it justice. Some called it a wake-up call. Others asked the biggest question of all: how many other officers think like him? It wasn't just about Mitchell anymore. It was about the entire system. TV networks ran the story. News headlines flashed across screens. Officer mocked black chief of police, instantly regrets it. Power doesn't equal respect, and this video proves it. Police reform needed now more than ever. When will it change? People had opinions. Some said Mitchell deserved it. Others said he should be fired permanently. Some asked, how many officers like him never get caught? The world was watching, and the department could feel the pressure. The precinct was not the same anymore. Officers were careful. They watched their words. They thought before they spoke. The unspoken rule had changed. Where before, people like Mitchell could say and do whatever they wanted, knowing there would be no consequences now. Now, they knew they were being watched. Now, they knew things were different. One officer's downfall had sent a message louder than any speech, any protest, any memo. Accountability had arrived. Mitchell sat alone in his dimly lit apartment. His laptop screen glowed in front of him, but he wasn't really watching. The news was playing. His own face, over and over again. The video replayed on every channel. He saw himself mocking her. He saw himself laughing. And then he saw the moment his face fell, the moment he realized who she really was. His downfall had been caught in high definition. There was no escaping it. There was no rewriting what had happened. He was officially suspended. The department had launched a full internal investigation. People had dug into his past, and now every complaint against him was being reviewed. This wasn't just about that one moment. This was about years of unchecked behavior catching up to him. He wasn't just suspended. He was done. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be powerless. For years, he'd used his badge to control people. Now, he was just another name on a long list of officers who had fallen from grace. And the worst part? No one felt sorry for him. Not his colleagues, not his superiors, not even the officers who had once laughed along with him. He was alone. While Mitchell sat in disgrace, drowning in the weight of his own mistakes, the chief of police was focused on something bigger. She wasn't celebrating his downfall. She didn't care about him anymore. What she cared about was the bigger issue, because Mitchell wasn't the problem. He was just a symptom of it. She sat in her office, scrolling through the thousands of messages, the overwhelming response. Some people applauded her. Some people thanked her. Some people asked her the only question that mattered: what now? She had spent years fighting for change. Now she had an opportunity. Now people were listening. Now she could push for something bigger. This wasn't just about one racist cop. This was about a broken system that let people like him exist unchecked, and she wasn't going to let that continue. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. The world was waiting. The chief stood behind the podium, microphone in front of her. She took a breath. Then she spoke with confidence. This incident is not an isolated one. This is not just about one officer's behavior, it's about the culture that allowed it. And today, we begin the process of changing that. The room was silent, listening. She continued, "Effective immediately. We are implementing a full review of officer conduct. We are establishing new training, oversight, and accountability measures. And, most importantly, this will not stop here." Her words were clear. This wasn't just a punishment. This was a movement. This was real change. Mitchell watched it all unfold on his TV. His hands were clenched into fists, not out of anger, not out of defiance, but because he knew. He knew his time was over. The world was moving forward without him, and he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. A lesson in what happens when arrogance meets accountability. He sat back in his chair, his heart heavy, his future uncertain, because this time there was no coming back. For years he had believed his badge made him untouchable, but now he understood the truth. It was never about the badge. It was about the person wearing it. And he had failed. The chief stepped away from the podium, walking off stage. She had made her announcement. Now it was time to make it real. She wasn't finished, not even close. Because Mitchell's fall wasn't the victory. The real victory would be ensuring that no one like him would ever hold power again. This was just the beginning, and she was ready for the fight ahead. As the chief walked away from the press conference, her mission was just beginning. Real change had started, and there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Mitchell sat alone, staring at the screen, watching the world move forward without him. He had spent years believing his badge made him powerful, but now he finally understood. Power doesn't come from a badge. It comes from character. And when you lack character, no badge in the world can protect you. Now, we ask you, what do you think? Should Mitchell be given a second chance, or is his career over for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in justice, accountability, and real change, then hit that like button and share this video. Let's make sure stories like this reach everyone. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that expose the truth behind power, respect, and consequences. Because at the end of the day, one decision can change everything. See you in the next video.